The part of the Christmas story that gets talked about, preached about the least is the story of Herod and the genocide and the killing of baby boys 2 years old and under.
Yeah.
And somehow that lament and that protest and that howl of pain makes it into the story of Christmas too.
We were listening to a podcast with our son a few nights ago. There's a Bible stories podcast he likes a lot. One of the ones that we've been listening to a lot lately is the life of Moses. And so when it's going through the 10 plagues and the very last one is the death of the firstborn boy, it's hard for me to listen to this with him. He's the firstborn boy. If at some point he doesn't encounter a faith in a God who is good and real and present in spite of these kind of things, he will never have a real faith. He will grow up and feel like the Christianity that he knew did not meet the very real needs and realities of the world in which he lived. If God is in that and in Rachel's tears, then God is with us in all of the other hardships and losses as well.
It is almost Christmas. And we've been walking together through Advent with this idea that in Jesus, God is offering us life together with him. You're going to go through the day anyway. You can go through it. I can go through it with God, or I can go through it without God. And it's much better to go through it with God. And it's always a good day when I get to go through at least a part of it with this person right here. This is Laura Kathleen Ortberg Turner.
Always a good day.
Always a good day. I was thinking about asking you about Christmas rituals, rhythms, but since you're the person who lied to her college, claiming that I forced you to have to listen to me reading through my books
I did.
Christmas time,
good one.
I thought it's pretty much useless doing that because you just lie anyhow.
We might. You never know. It always makes things a little more interesting. There's a Christmas tip for you.
Yeah?
Just tell a white lie at a party if you find yourself getting bored. Work.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Note to self.
Yeah.
And you're in a car right now because
I'm out Christmas shopping with my mom.
I know.
Your wife. And
Yes.
But I made her disappear for a little bit so we could, have a chat here in the car without her distracting me.
Because if she was there, she would be distracted again.
She would. She doesn't sit still too well, but
No, it's not a spiritual gift.
not so much.
Well, thank you for being willing to interrupt shopping time, Christmas shopping time, for doing this. And as we were talking about this, you were talking about author Fleming Rutledge, who's a wonderful writer, thinker, preacher, and she actually has a book about Advent. And you had some thoughts from that?
I had some thoughts from that. I did.
Deer in the headlights look here.
I'm accused.
You look fierce.
No, I didn't have deer in the headlights. I just had normal.
No. I was close to deer in the headlights.
Oh, well, sure. Yeah. I don't want you to get hit. So, with that, we will abscond over to Fleming. I don't think that was the right way to use abscond, but she is just a preacher and writer and thinker and theologian who I have really loved and respected over the years. In some ways, her writing reminds me a lot of Barbara Brown Taylor's, although I think she's more of a she's less of sort of like a gentle shepherd preacher and a little more maybe intellectual in a way. But anyway, she has this really great book of collected sermons, really, that are kind of about Advent or about other things that have to do with themes of Advent. And so she had this beautiful sermon that was all about the God who hides. And in that essay or sermon, she talks a little bit about this idea that, it's one of the best reasons to read through the Old Testament is because it's just full of descriptions of what God is like. And one of those ways of presenting God, even according to people like Blaise Pascal and some others, the way of presenting God in the Old Testament is by apophatic theology, like getting to know who God is by getting to know what we don't know about God. So if we were to live in a world where we couldn't say anything positive about what God is, not positive, like, you go, girl, but, like,
you go, God.
I am not these things. How would we know God? And so she talks a lot about, the passage where Moses wants to see the face of God, for example, and God puts him in a little cleft in the rock and covers him up, and then, was it Moses or was that Abraham? This is so embarrassing.
It was Moses, I think, yeah.
Oh, good. Okay, phew.
You're exactly right.
I doubted myself for a second. And so thinking about that, I suppose all of this is to say, like, at this time of year when...
That reminds me of one of my favorite jokes, can I tell you?
Sure.
It's a little bit loose.
Do I have a choice?
But I heard this from my friend Gary Moon, who grew up in a Pentecostal holiness background. And he tells, supposedly this happened. They were at a conference one time and people were prophesying. And one guy got up and said, "Thus saith the Lord, even as I was with Abraham as he led the children across the wilderness, so I will be with you." And then he sat down, and then his wife nudged him and whispered in his ear, and he stood back up and said, "Thus saith the Lord, I was mistaken. It was Moses."
That's pretty funny.
Yeah, I might have told it before. I don't know. So if you're listening to this and it's repetitious, you just have to put up with what my kids have to put up with all the time.
It is. That's so true.
Abraham, Moses, pretty close.
Potato, really.
Yeah.
Someone should cross-stitch that onto a pillow. But I guess, anyways, I think about this season in Advent when we're supposed to be kind of waiting in the darkness and all these things, that there's this like real juxtaposition where Moses is waiting in the darkness to just find out, God, what does your face look like? That's the thing that I want to know. And there's such, one of the things Fleming Rutledge writes about is like, of course we can't know what God is like. Of course, God is beyond our imagination in his hiddenness because we didn't come up with God. So like, what makes us think that we can just kind of take every piece apart and understand God like he was some, clock, and we could understand by breaking down the sum of his parts what he is like. And so in that sense of like, God is showing us who he is all the time, but it's always greater than what we can perceive. It is shrouded in not just darkness, but hiddenness. And I thought that was... She kind of says there's no point in having a faith that doesn't believe that God is hidden and doesn't have some kind of illumination or understanding as to why, because faith that doesn't grapple with that is a fairly shallow faith. And she gave this sermon right around the time of the Sandy Hook massacre. So there are all these very young children, my son's age, who had died. There's no answer for why. That's not a topic that's gone away in the world. It takes very little attention now to know that there are children the world over, from Ukraine to Israel, Palestine, who are dying. And I would have to think, if I was in that position, I need to know not only that God is in darkness, but that God is hidden, because God better be somewhere. And I don't know why he's hiding, why these things are happening. But if I don't believe that he is somewhere, at least with me in some way, hiding, and his goodness and his love and mercy are operating behind the scenes where I can't see them, then it's kind of an anemic faith. It's kind of too thin to really stand up to, what actually happens in the world. And so I think that there's a lot of power in that and in who God is. But I have to always remember that I can't see or even imagine, no eye has seen nor ear has heard. But that's like not just because God is so good to us in our lives and giving us the things that we want all the time, but because God is there with us somehow in hiding when we are in what feels like endless darkness.
I was thinking when you were talking about that, probably the part of the Christmas story or the passage in the Christmas story that gets talked about, preached about the least, be interested to hear your thoughts on this. I don't think we've ever talked about this before, is the story of Herod and the genocide and the killing of baby boys 2 years old and under. And it's made me think sometimes, how would the families that lost a child have felt about Mary and Joseph and the story of Jesus, and when Jesus was 30 and those moms were to hear about him, what would that evoke in them? And that story is part of what made it into Scripture. And there's that quote from the passage in Jeremiah, a voice is heard in Ramah, Rachel weeping for her children. And that's the story in Jeremiah where Rachel, who had been the wife of Jacob, they ended up moving her bones later on near Bethlehem, so that when the Israelites had to go into exile, they would have to walk past where her grave was. So Jeremiah uses that as a picture of deep suffering. This matriarch, Rachel, who is weeping for the children of Israel, who then are being oppressed, uprooted, sometimes killed by their enemies. Then it's Babylon. And then it's so striking, just the language, weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted.
Yeah.
And it's that picture of, people coming to you, and often we want to comfort other people when they're suffering. I think about Kate Bowler's book, Everything Happens for a Reason, and other lies that I've cherished. We want to make other people feel better because I don't want to feel bad. And there's a kind of integrity to that Rachel refusing to be comforted. No, don't give me a reason. Don't explain it. Don't tell me it's okay. Don't tell me God had it. But I will not receive that comfort. I will protest and lament my lost children. And somehow that lament and that protest and that howl of pain makes it into the story of Christmas too.
Yeah. And I mean, I think about, we were listening to a podcast with our son a few nights ago. There's a Bible stories podcast he likes a lot, and it recounts stories from the scriptures. And it is not, they have the one about Legion, where Jesus cast that demon out into the 300 pigs or whatever. And so my, almost 6-year-old son is sitting there listening to these creepy pigs talking about how we are Legion, and they run over the demons on them. Yeah. Anyways, they run over the cliff. And but one of the ones that we've been listening to a lot lately is the life of Moses. And so when it's going through the 10 plagues, and the very last one is the death of the firstborn boy in Israel, which marks Passover, it's I don't, whenever he wants to listen to that one, I try to think of sitting with, it's hard for me to listen to this with him. He's the firstborn boy. And there's a real, if at some point he doesn't encounter a faith in a God who is good and real and present in spite of these kinds of things, he will never have a real faith. He will grow up and feel like the Christianity that he knew was did not meet the very real needs and realities of the world in which he lived. And so that's a big part of, the death of a child is, I think, probably, we can all agree, one of the worst, if not the worst kind of thing that can happen to a person. And so there is something very powerful about saying, if God is in that and in Rachel's tears and, somehow with Moses and in all of these things, then God is with us in all of the other, hardships and losses as well. I was talking this last week in therapy, which, by the way, you still haven't paid for. I can send you a bill.
No, I cost the need for it, but I haven't paid for it yet.
Pay for their kids' whole therapies. Mom's outside the car telling me to wrap it up. She just went like this. So I will. Anyways, in therapy, my therapist, who's very wise and wonderful, was talking about how she was doing a Visio Divina. So Latin expert, you want to tell us what that means?
Is that where instead of reading a text, you're looking at images?
Yeah, Visio being the Latin root of the word vision. Get it? Vision. You Visio the Divina. And she was looking at this painting by William Holman Hunt, who a lot of folks might be familiar with. He did a painting called The Light of the World, and it's a painting of Jesus holding this kind of lantern based around the text, here I stand. or he stands at the door and knocks in Revelation, and there's no handle on the outside of the door. It's only very clearly like
Only can be open from
indoors.
the inside.
Yes. And it's very, very dark and brambly and wintry outside. Like it's a very barren landscape. And then the knock, the Jesus in this painting doesn't have his hand even like this to knock. It's just kind of like this, like it would be like a very gentle and soft noise. And I feel like just thinking of that in line with the hiddenness of God, it's like to be alive on the earth, to see, through a glass dimly, is to just be in this room where we have the handle on one side and there's something on the other side and we do not and cannot know what it is. And so we might hear in moments or sense a presence or see something or feel something, but 99% of the time we're just going about our days inside our little rooms. And it's only when we die that we really, can
see what's on the other side of the door
and experience it in a felt way. Like we can have little glimpses of that now, but to experience life on the other side of the door, it's hidden from us on this side of the veil.
Can I ask you one more question? Will Mom allow it, or is she going to break into the car?
No, I think we're good now. Yeah, she's gone for the moment.
All right, so this one's...
Can I disturb you?
No, it's not. No, it's a good one, but it's
Too
not
bad.
the land
Yeah.
one.
Oh, well, one time you said you were preaching a sermon, and then afterwards there was like people that were wanting to talk to you about it, and one guy said, "Excuse me, may I disturb you?" And you said, "Yeah, of course." And he said, "Ah."
Yeah, and he did disturb me.
Backs me up, yeah.
But no, that wasn't the question. What I was thinking, it's more personal. I don't think I've asked you this one, but when you think about how you heard about God and Jesus and the story of Christmas as you were growing up, if you were to say, here's one thing I didn't hear talked about enough, or here's an aspect of it, or a question about it, or some dimension of life that can be troubling that needs to be connected to that story that didn't, or something that didn't get named. Anything come to mind? Is there anything that, as you look back on it, you feel like, I wish earlier on in life I could have heard this about God or faith or life?
Yeah, it's funny you asked that because I just, so this week I'm in an Ignatian prayer group that started back during COVID, and we still meet once a month together and just have it's just a lovely time with like the most calm, wonderful people. And one of them said something this week that really cracked me up, but also made me think, oh, I love this. So it's not necessarily like I wish that Dad, you would have told me, you or someone would have emphasized this as a kid. But he was thinking about Mary, and I don't think you're going to know who this person is, but he said he pictured her as a Natasha Lyonne kind of character. And Natasha Lyonne is this actress who was in a show called Orange is the New Black and a show called Russian Doll. And she's always just sort of like smoking a cigarette. Her hair is kind of wild. Like she's always like a little bothered by everybody around her. And I think the point was kind of like, Mary was a real person. She was a teenager, she was a young teenager. And in every way that we know of, we valorize her, and for very good reason. And I wonder how crazy it was for her to find this out. I wonder, a lot of things about her. And I think being raised in a more evangelical tradition, her role in it was sort of like to lift up, women in a certain way, but there's not as much thought given to like what she was like or the physicality of giving birth at her age. I also have a very good friend from grad school who was at a young age herself, at around the same age, that Mary was thought to be, was put in treatment for an eating disorder. It was like a inpatient treatment. So she has this memory of her being 13 years old, looking out the window at her mom leaving. And it was around Christmas time, and of her mom looking up, and her mom in that moment felt like, okay, Mary is the only person who can understand the pain I'm having right now. And my friend was okay and came through it really well. But like, how striking is that to think, and that made their whole family Catholic. They weren't Catholic before that, but they became Catholic after that because the mom was like,
Wow.
This is the only thing I can draw strength from right now. And so I think just the personhood of who Mary was, to be able to say yes to Jesus like that, but then also the power of the Magnificat and like comforting the downtrodden and knocking down the afflicted. Like, she had a real fire in her. And so, yeah, I just, I love thinking about who she was and how she might have been a little different than this kind of like demure young woman that I can tend to think of her as.
It's a wonderful exercise to just think through characters in the Bible, or maybe even in the Christmas story in the Holy Family, and think about actors or folks that don't fit the herbal tea, all this category, tattooed, whatever, just to get them into the real people category. And so y'all might do that today. Everybody watching this, just think about a few unlikely suspects and put them in the story and see how that makes you find God in a new way, especially the God who is with us when we are weeping and refuse to be comforted. Thanks, Lola.
Thanks, Dado. Love ya.
Love you.
Hey, if you like that video, go ahead and subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss any future episodes in this series, Finding God in Your World, where John will sit down with a different guest each episode, asking them that simple question: where are you finding God in your world? If you want more resources, head on over to becomenew.com/subscribe, where you can let us know if you'd like to receive the emails that go along with each video with extra content and information, or if you want to sign up for the text reminders whenever we drop a new video. Also, if you've got a prayer request, there's a group of us who meet each weekday, Monday through Friday, to pray for viewers just like yourself. So you can send us your prayer request to 855-888-0444, and we would love to pray for you. We'll catch you next time.